Good evening, everybody. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com. Excited to be with you on the 13th day of February 2013. Lots of different stuff we're going to get into in the world of sports. And I do thank everybody who tuned in yesterday and listened to the interview I did with two-time Super Bowl champion New York Giants linebacker Gary Reasons. Some good insight there in regards to his career. One of the things that stood out to me, I was pretty fascinated with the fact that he ended up, going to school in Northwest State in Louisiana that ended up producing so many NFL players. And it was, you're looking at a small school. So you're looking at a school that doesn't get a, ridiculous amount of attention. Recruiting probably isn't looked at, as unbelievable. And what ends up happening is this is a team that produced 65 pros, including Jeremy Lane, who's still in the NFL right now. But one of the things I wanted to touch on in regards to the interview, and actually apologize, the first question I ended up asking, he's given his answer, and all of a sudden my audio feed cut out, so I actually couldn't hear part of the answer. And what ends up happening is I end up asking a similar question again. And I kind of felt a little silly about that, hearing that during the playback. So anybody that heard that, I'm going to try to edit it out in regards to the YouTube video. But, it was just a situation where all of a sudden I didn't get sound a little bit. And then my follow-up question, not knowing that he already answered it. So I felt kind of stupid. But two things I want to touch on today. And if you think of things going on in the world of professional sports, there's a couple things that probably stand out more than others. And one of them is the use of performance-enhancing drugs, particularly in baseball. And the other one would be the NFL protests, which were led by Colin Kaepernick. And the sad thing, or an unfortunate thing about it, is both of those issues are back up in the news again. And in the news for frustrating reasons, but probably things that, I don't know, I don't think you could reinforce anymore what you've already heard. And obviously everybody is polarized in regards to each of these two issues individually. We think of steroids in baseball, you're either in favor of it, or it doesn't matter to you, it's not a big deal, or it's something that bothers you and you hate the fact that they ever existed in the game and would do anything you possibly can to get them removed. Hopefully they stay away forever, and every player that's ever used it should be held to some sort of accountability for what they did. Okay, I don't think it's a terrible issue if you feel that way, or even if you're for it. Curt Flood, one of the major contributors to the Mitchell Report when it comes to giving the information, being able and willing to rat players out and not really have any regard as far as the way they treated them. And I do want to fix this camera feed that I got going on here. I'll be right back in a second. Unfortunately, tad bit off. And should be okay now. So, once again, sorry about that issue. But, in regards to baseball, when it comes to the use of PEDs, the use of steroids, Curt Flood, Mets clubhouse, attended for about 10 years from 1985 to 1995, doesn't, seems to be willing to give up all possible information when it comes to this. And he's in the news again because there's an issue going on with ACES, an agency which represents several different players. And also, if you go back, about 4 or 5 years ago, and you know your baseball pretty good, you remember the Melky Cabrera steroid case. He had that breakout season with the Kansas City Royals, but the following year ended up having a great performance in the All-Star game for the San Francisco Giants. Seems to be leading the team on their way. And if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to have to go to numbers all the time. I want to be able to store these in my head. I'm saying 2012. And if I'm wrong, call it out. Let me know that I was wrong on the Melky Cabrera steroid year. But I'm saying 2012. He ends up failing a drug test. He gets suspended for, I believe it was 50 games or maybe 80 games at the time, whatever the suspension was. And he ends up having a friend, whether it's a person that's working for the agency, whether it's a person working for Melky Cabrera, he ends up putting up this fake website and to try to prove that the test that he failed somehow wasn't clean or whatever, to get him off of the charges as far as him being guilty of using performance-enhancing drugs. Well, guess what? The bottom line is he admitted to it, he served the suspension, and you're looking at a handful of years later, he's still playing Major League Baseball, so he's still doing okay in regards to, getting a paycheck in Major League Baseball. I know he's a free agent right now, finished last year with the Kansas City Royals. I'm sure he's going to find a job playing somewhere, but this guy comes into prominence because he's the guy that set up the fake website that allowed or was trying to overturn what was an unfortunate decision and, something that hurt Melky Cabrera. Certainly hurt him in a year that he was testing free agency. So this could have impacted money coming in his pocket. And unfortunately, Melky Cabrera, who was trying to get away with it, pretty similar to what Ryan Braun did. Trying to blame the tests, said the tests were tainted. And, the samples were touched inappropriately or improperly by the person that was brought to his house or his residence to pick him up. But the bottom line is Melky Cabrera's bullying tactic that he was trying to use with this fake website ends up failing. But not only that, this one person ends up taking a hit for it, the guy that set up the website. He ends up having one thing lead into another, ends up having to serve some time in prison. So he gets out of prison, and he wants a little venom himself. So he goes out there and says, listen, ACES, the agency that I'm working for, was working with, whether it was a Curt Flood or some other people that were supplying nutritional substances that were, contained steroids to several players. Curt Flood, admits, says, hey, I was part of the ones that was sending them in a clubhouse with the New York Mets from 1985 to 1995. So, once again, you have proof, but maybe not any more proof than what you already know. Because the one thing that stands out is Curt Flood's timeline, which already hit the media in regards to the Mitchell report. 1985 to 1995. And you know what? Let's be serious. Sure, there wasn't a ton of evidence that steroids were going on in baseball in 1985. But I'm sure there was a little bit going on. So if you say that started a little early, you want to start 87, 88, 89, 90, and then go all the way through the beginning of 2000 up to about 2003, that seems accurate. But, a guy that was involved and admits through the clubhouse with the New York Mets, he was passing out steroids left and right for the 10 years that he was there, it's kind of information that we already know. And the issue that comes out is obviously damage control for this guy that worked for the agency. And obviously he deserves the right to speak. And if he feels like he was wronged in any way, he's got the right to say what's on his mind, say what he feels happened. I don't have a ton of credibility towards this guy. I mean, here's a guy who picked up and made up and created a fictitious website with the hope of deceiving the public for Melky Cabrera's drug test. And I don't know if he was doing that for other people too. Was that a plan to have this website set up where if any one of your players fail, you could refer to it and maybe get you out of jail free kind of thing? I thought that Melky Cabrera situation was funny. I mean, I look back at it now, and I was, if something like that happened in a game right now, we'd be laughing. We'd really be thinking about how hilarious it is. But, this is a guy that's obviously trying to defend himself. My initial thought was that we were going to get maybe some more names in regards to players that were using performance-enhancing drugs. Now, the issue that I have with this, and this is the part of it that kind of does bother me, we have certain different kinds of evidence. And then people that want to make a name for themselves and they want to defend their point of view, whether it's this guy that, came up with this website for Melky Cabrera, or somebody else that's just trying to, number one, save their image, or number two, make a name for themselves. So if this guy starts dropping names left and right, this guy, and all of a sudden we're like, we hadn't heard that person tied to steroids before, so all of a sudden we have to throw them in the mix and say that they use PEDs. I don't think it should work that way. Unfortunately, if we're going to call out a name, remember what Jack Clark did when he was on that, radio show or pregame show or whatever, and he decides to call out Albert Pujols. Hey, he looks like a guy that was using steroids. Well, Albert Pujols did the right thing and sued the crap out of him. Because, whether you're on a national show or whether you're on a show like I'm doing, you don't have the right to do that. You can't just on a whim say that somebody that's never had any evidence or anything that implicated them to the use of any sort of performance-enhancing drugs to just go say, yes, he looks like he did it. Because that's not fair to that person. And you don't have any evidence to support your claim. So that's what ended up hurting Jack Clark. He lost his job on the radio, and he deserved to lose his job. He can't go and say stuff like that on a whim. But the unfortunate thing, and I keep mentioning this, so we go back years upon years with players that use performance-enhancing drugs and steroids in baseball, and sometimes you wish you just knew for certain. Player X, Player Y, Player Z, they definitely used. And A, B, and C, you knew they were 100% clean. Unfortunately, it's not the world we live in, and unfortunately, it's not that cut and dry or that easy. If it was, you know what? I would have a little more of a strong opinion when it comes to keeping players that used out. And when I say out, I mean out of the game, out of the Hall of Fame, out of baseball altogether. I think baseball could have taken a harsher stance if they knew right off the bat, this player did, that player didn't. These are the guys that did it this time, and these other players did it at this time. If it was that easy, then I'm telling you, my personal opinion in regards to steroids and the use of performance-enhancing drugs, I'd be a lot harder on these people. But here's the problem. Nobody's ever going to know what players did and what players didn't. So it's not fair to those players that may not have done it. It's not fair to those players that may have stronger muscle masses and may look like they were bigger, may have looked like they juiced, but in all honesty didn't. Because if there's no way to tell yes or no, then why is it fair to those players that decided to admit to it? Mark McGwire is a very good example, because I know he took his time. He wasn't up front about it right away. I know he had to have his little special, where he's sitting there with the mic in his hand and he's crying the whole thing. But he was grown enough to decide that he was going to admit what it is that he did. So why should a Mark McGwire be punished more by baseball or in the court of public opinion than somebody that's lying to you? You don't know whether he did or didn't. And you know what? He may have done it, but isn't willing to tell you. I don't think it's fair to that person that's honest. And I'm not saying Mark McGwire was honest the entire time, but he was honest when he decided to stand up and speak about steroids. But here's my issue, and this is the thing that's bothered me the most. If a player decides to admit it, and I'm going to say in a McGwire's case, and I know he was kind of pushed to it. He wanted to get the job as a coach in Major League Baseball. I get it. I do. I understand it. But he decides that he's going to admit it. He's going to be honest. And then there's another player out there, whoever it is, that's going to deny it to a point, may use the courts if they want to, i.e. a Roger Clemens or Barry Bonds, somebody that wants to clear their name any way that they can. And if legally you can't say that they definitely used, are they to be treated the same way as somebody that admitted? That's a question that has to be answered. And this is the thing that's going to drive me crazy in a world when it comes to baseball and the use of performance-enhancing drugs. We want to be strong. We want to be tough on these players. We want to say, hey, you fail a test right now, and you have to be suspended. But the players that were using in the late 1980s and the 1990s, or the prime of baseball, when the home run chase in 1998 was saving a game of baseball from the baseball strike of 1994. And we looked at these guys as our heroes. And now we find out that they were using performance-enhancing drugs, but we were too stupid to see in our own eyes then what was going on. It's not like there was anything going on differently now. It's not like we have so much better technology, in 2010 or 2006 or 2003 that was so much better than what was going on in 1998 or 2001. If you weren't seeing that Barry Bonds was getting a synthetic boost to his power in 2001, when, by the way, he had never approached 60 home runs in his career. And you couldn't put two and two together to say that it was tied to what was going on with McGwire and Sosa in 1998. Then I don't know what to tell you. The problem is the only people that seem to get a pass in regards to their ignorance seem to be the fans and the media. Now, I understand you didn't inject anything in your body, likely. I mean, if you decided you want to use steroids, it's on you. But for the people that don't, you weren't guilty in regards to any type of drug use in this situation. But how much responsibility goes on you, the observer? You were just as ignorant as the baseball teams, the baseball players, management, the commissioner, everybody else that you want to blame. The fans and the media were just as ignorant. So now, years later, we just decide that we want to pick and choose whatever player that we think was using performance-enhancing drugs and label them differently. And then, you know what? If we're the Atlanta Braves and you're a big-time Atlanta Braves fan, that means Chipper Jones, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Tom Glavine, they're all clean. And they're all clean because you're a Braves fan. And if you're a Yankees fan, you're gonna make sure, hey, Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, Bernie Williams, Jorge Posada, they're all 100% clean. The problem that we have when we're studying this, when we're looking back from afar, is that we don't know. And I think we could all admit that there was this time frame, especially in the first part of it, especially in the latter part of the 80s, going into the better part of the 90s. Every single one of us that was following the game is ignorant and was ignorant to what was going on. And like I said, we're all entitled to our own opinions. So if steroids in baseball pissed you off to a point where you can't stand to look at somebody that did it, all right, you're entitled to your opinion. And if you feel that players that are known to have used should never be in baseball's Hall of Fame, you have the right to feel that way too. But there's no accountability when it comes to the fans or the media. We put as much emphasis in studying and backing up the game, any game that we love. We're knowledgeable. Are we going to all of a sudden say that, fans and people in the media are not knowledgeable in regards to the sports that they watch? Fans and the media were just as ignorant as these players and everybody else that enabled baseball players to use steroids in the 90s and the early part of the 2000s. So when you're going out there, when you're reading the story about the agent who ends up serving a prison sentence because he, ends up getting himself into trouble with drugs that he's moving around, creates a fake website to try to get another player off of a positive drug test. It's natural to be out there and be greedy in regards to wanting to hear names. and you want to hear names, you want to hear more people that were involved or more people that were using steroids than we ever knew. Maybe there is somebody that one may have been suspicious of, but there was never any evidence. And you want that player to, have to admit what it is that they did. And you know what? When it comes to really anything in sports, because remember, sports is just a game. It is. It's for the fans. It's for the entertainment of fans. You'd like to see honesty. And I understand not everybody is an honest person. Any profession you talk about, anything that somebody does for a living, odds are somebody is not going to be 100% honest. Does cheating exist in any world of work? Of course. If somebody can find an advantage and know they won't be caught, they're probably going to take advantage of it. But baseball, football, basketball, hockey, even down to the world of professional wrestling, which we know exactly what that is. We know that that's staged. We know that, it's not as violent. It is violent on the players. I mean, they do have to worry about CT and stuff like that. But it's not like boxing, professional boxing or, MMA, where these people are really going at it. A lot of it is staged. But the bottom line and what it all has in common is the fact that it's all entertainment. It's all for the people that are watching. So my point has been, why not see the best of the best, whatever it is that they want to do? Now, baseball has a drug testing program now. They should have all along. Nobody wants to blame, Bud Selig or going back further, Faye Vincent or Bart Giamatti or Peter Uberoff. You want to even go back to Bowie Kuhn. It's not like anybody in baseball really stepped up until the pressure was put on them. And that's when Congress got involved and brought all the different players in and kind of, made a mockery of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and just about everybody that spoke that day. But, it's a shame that we look back on it and we're so upset with what these players chose to do. Yet, we, just as much as anybody else, enabled them. And from an entertainment standpoint, that's all we really want to see on the field is the action. We don't want to be sidetracked with this melodrama and this crap on the side. Oh, was a player doing this or doing that? Or is this a good person or a bad person? When you're a team, when you root for whatever team it is that you want to see win, it's about wins and losses. It's about the individual game you're watching, the one that you want to see go the way of your team. And say, hey, I want my team to win. And that's all it comes down to. Sometimes you don't care how they do it. You think the Kansas City Royals in 1985, who got that Don Denkinger call, go their way, were happy to win the World Series? You think they want to give it back and say, hey, the umpire made the wrong call. Let's go back and play it at the time because I want things to be fair? Of course not. We can look at all the controversial calls that happened or the calls that came down to the last moment. Pitcher blowing a lead. Donnie Moore. You think the Red Sox in 1986 say, man, you know what? It's a shame what happened to Donnie Moore. I don't want him to commit suicide. Let's reverse how that game went because maybe it wasn't fair. It's entertainment. What happens on the field stays on the field. And another thing I'm going to get into, and this kind of set me off topic, and I'm going to get into this a little bit. We talk about, let's say, and I'll use the example of a Joe Paterno at Penn State. Sandusky scandal. Obviously a heinous thing. Disgusting. This man deserves to be in prison. It's a shame what he did to those little boys. All that being said, when you go back in time and you say as an entity, the NCAA, that you have the right to vacate wins that happened because, let's say, a player was ineligible, a player received money that they shouldn't have been paid, a coach on the sideline is a serial rapist in a locker room. What does that have to do with the action on the field years ago? Once again, entertainment. We're taking away the illegal things that happen outside of it. And we see in the majority of cases, if not every single one, those that broke the law are held accountable for it. So why does the NCAA have to go further and decide that the amount of wins or, certain wins that happen from this time to this time are vacated by teams that actually won the game? You know what? Nobody all of a sudden is that watched that game is going to forget what they saw. If they went to Michigan or Penn State or USC and saw that game happen with their own eyes, you're going to all of a sudden tell me that they're going to forget that happened? They're going to be told that didn't happen even though they saw that it really happened. So when it comes to entertainment, the fans are the ones that are getting gypped with all this extra BS. All the microscopes putting on what do the players look like? Are they there legally or illegally? And of course, I'm not talking about U.S. citizens here. If somebody enhanced their performance with the use of performance-enhancing drugs, what they end up cheating on the most is themselves. And they're the ones that'll have to live not just with guilt that could be attributed to it, that could be part of it as well, but they have to live with all the potential side effects. Whether it's the smaller testicles, whether it's the, issues that they have down the road, loss of hair, loss of, muscle mass, getting sick in any sort of way, and potentially having a shorter life. That's what they signed up for when they decided to get involved in what they did. But from an entertainment standpoint, if you're the media, if you're the fans, you should judge the results that you see in front of you. And understand if something is being done illegally or against the rules, you leave it up to the governing body of the sport to make the correct decision and put the correct series of discipline in place. It's up to the sport to do that. As a fan or as the media, your job is to watch the game. Your job is to react to the game. If you have a rooting interest, good for you. If you work for an outlet, you probably shouldn't have a rooting interest. Give a respective analysis of what it is that you see. Anything that's outside of the sport should not be thrown into play. And I tell you, the thing that frustrates me the most about baseball and its Hall of Fame is the fact that it's almost as if the goal is to prove or to try to make somebody ineligible for the Hall of Fame before we talk about what they did as credentials to get in. Goose Gossage spoke the other day. Already spoken for years. His latest issue is what he's got going on. He doesn't like Brian Cashman. Maybe he wants to be a guest instructor, doesn't want to be a guest instructor for the Yankees in spring training. Obviously, he's been one of the Hall of Famers that has been the most outspoken about players that have used performance-enhancing drugs. Joe Morgan wrote the letter out, open letter, to the baseball writers saying, please, can you consider the integrity of the sport, the integrity of the players that were using performance-enhancing drugs, and say that, hey, we made it in baseball for a certain amount of time. The game was tainted. Can we please leave these players out if it's at all possible? Well, what does that mean for the player that's already in? And I'm not going to sit here and nitpick and say this player is in the Hall of Fame and used, and this person didn't. There's a good chance that a handful of players that are in baseball's Hall of Fame probably used and we'll never know about it. And you know what? If they could keep that secret, or hopefully they could keep themselves financially independent, or have enough money where they never hit the rough time, and as we hit the halfway point here on the Pass Ball Show, Once again, John Pielli with you. The number, if you want to call in and be part of the program, is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Finishing up this discussion, and of course it's attributed to the agent, the guy that set up that fictitious website for Melky Cabrera in 2012 when he got busted for PEDs. Now, they're obviously every time something that involves the use of PEDs comes out, it becomes a hot issue again. And I tell you, I know I could get some back and forth with people in regards to this. There's people that believe that every player that used should essentially go to prison. Obviously, I think that's too far. Should there be a penalty or a series of penalties in baseball in regards to, what happens if you get caught or you fail a drug test? Of course. But once again, moving on. Keep your comments going. I see any player that took PEDs has forfeited his right to be enshrined. And, you're emphatically saying that. 11X champs, X11. Listen, I agree with that standpoint. I think you're on. I think that opinion makes a lot of sense. But what happens when it involves players that you don't know? I mean, until the days that we put this polygraph test and make every player, have it hooked up to a computer and to a chip. And I'm talking about technology in the future that we're going to see. Everybody's going to have a chip in them. Everything's going to be detected. How you think, where you're going, what you're going to do. Until that happens, until we have that technology, you're never going to know what players used and what players didn't. So my question, if you want to answer it, please feel free. How many players are in the Hall of Fame that use PEDs? I mean, if I'm going to give a rough guess, I would say somewhere between the lines of 2 to 5, maybe more. You have to say that every player that started their career either in the late 80s or the 90s and played through the early part of 2000s is at least suspect, is at least guilty by association. And I'm not saying guilty by association to a point where they had to have used performance-enhancing drugs, but they had the opportunity to do that. And what if somebody was able to mask their appearance? You're talking about baseball players that wear pants and a shirt. You may see them in a locker room, but you don't know how cut they are. You don't know how much muscle mass they have. Not everybody that uses performance-enhancing drugs blows up like Shaq. Not everybody that uses steroids becomes Hulk Hogan. So, to say that every player that took PEDs, yes, they should not be in the Hall of Fame. But if it was that cut and dry, if it was that easy to tell, that point would make 100% sense. But it's not. Baseball dropped the ball. Baseball had the opportunity to be on this situation way earlier, way before Congress got involved, way before Congress embarrassed a handful of baseball players, way before Jose Canseco's book. So the issue that I got is exactly this. Tell me exactly, without a doubt, which players used and which players didn't. And I'll tell you to be a lot harder on those that you knew did it. But when there likely are players in baseball's Hall of Fame right now that used, how can you say that they're allowed in or they're allowed to stay in while others are held out? Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. I'll throw the number out there one more time, 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Anything on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Colin Kaepernick is taking his grievance that he has to court, and he should. If we don't think that the guy had a right, at the very least, to have a tryout, to be on the field, to perform in training camp this past year, it's unfortunate that he didn't get that opportunity. So we look back at it as far as, this amount of time later. The guy's obviously lost an opportunity to play in a National Football League. We saw some of the lousy quarterbacks that were out there. And I'm not going to tell you that Colin Kaepernick is a star or a guy that belongs in, the Pro Bowl or a guy that should be starting for whatever team. I'm not going to go out there and say any of that. Colin Kaepernick was deprived of an opportunity. How much was collusion amongst the NFL owners involved in it? Well, the fact, and I understand he took the risk when he decided to kneel for the national anthem. I understand that. There's accountability that has to go his way. And if you decided that, you believe Colin Kaepernick is so right and you don't want to throw any sort of accountability this way, his way, unfortunately, it's something that, you're being ignorant as well, which is unfortunate. And I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair what happened to him. I don't think it's, the rights of 32 NFL owners and whoever it is that's making a decision to hold Colin Kaepernick back. I don't think it's fair to anybody that's making a stance, that's deciding somewhere along the lines that they believe what Colin Kaepernick is saying, and they believe that there is injustice, whether it's through the police department or as time goes by, they just simply want to protest the president. People have the right to their own opinions, but shouldn't have to lose their job over it. And the issue with Colin Kaepernick is the thought that maybe, and this is why he has a chance to file a grievance, this is why he has the chance to send this to trial, maybe he lost his job because of that. And there's people that believe wholeheartedly that he did. And once again, similar to your opinion on steroids and the use of performance-enhancing drugs in sports, your opinion's good. If you feel a certain way, that's fine. Colin Kaepernick lost potentially a year of his NFL career. And the simplest way to answer this question over whether or not Colin Kaepernick is deprived an opportunity to play in the NFL, I think it's this simple. It really is. And here's what I want you to think about if you're on the fence about this. If Colin Kaepernick had not decided not to kneel during the national anthem, draw any sort of attention to himself in that way, would he still be playing in the NFL right now? And if the answer to that question is yes, then I made my point. Colin Kaepernick does have a grievance. He has a right to be upset. He has the right to take this thing to trial. Now, should he cost Papa John his job? Those details are brought up. Listen, anytime you hire a good lawyer is going to dig up everything they possibly can to hold as many different people accountable as they possibly can. That's their job. And in some cases, just like athletes, there's some good lawyers and there's some bad lawyers. Lawyers are judged by how often they win the cases they represent. If they're a civil attorney, if they win, or if they're a criminal attorney or a prosecutor, they're judged by the results of their trials. If they win, then they're pretty good. If they lose, they're not so good. Just like athletes. A winning player. Derek Jeter was a winner. Joe DiMaggio was a winner. Reggie Jackson was a winner. But when it comes to the rights that somebody may have to hold on to a job for standing up for a cause, which is obviously what he did, and it doesn't matter what your issue is or what your feelings is on the particular matter. Whether you think he was right, whether you think he was wrong, you know what? It's not important in this issue. What it's going to come down to is, does he have the right to essentially be blackballed in a league that he is in because of the stance that he's decided to take? And the answer is no. And like I said, you could say that you believe that he was wrong in the way he handled himself. You could agree that you feel that he would have been best suited to take his issues and his beef and handle it in a different way. You got the right to feel that way. But what you don't have the right to say is that the guy deserves to lose his job over it. And the answer is you don't. Now I'm trying to get Jared's comment here on Periscope in regards to Kaepernick. You know, it's been a while since he's been playing. I mean, can he play, let's say, the next training camp, the next year? Is it fair enough to say that he could go out there and be a starting quarterback in the National Football League right now? I don't know. But you do have to admit there is a little bit of shadiness going on here. I mean, if you see some of the garbage, and I listen, I don't mean to insult any athlete at all, but the quality of play for National Football League quarterbacks, particularly the backups and the third stringers, they're going in there. If you're telling me that Colin Kaepernick isn't good enough to at least be the next man in line for one of these teams, think about how many starting quarterbacks were lost for the season last year. Whether it was Andrew Luck, whose season was over before it started. You know, the Minnesota situation where they end up going to their third quarterback in Case Keenum. Deshaun Watson, who was off to that great start. It was an incredible story last year. Ends up getting hurt. Aaron Rodgers. Carson Wentz. And then the series of quarterbacks that were playing ineffectively in the National Football League. Now, I understand, and I made a comparison a couple months ago, and I said, what similarity would exist between a Colin Kaepernick and a Tim Tebow? And I said that the reason that I make a little bit of a comparison to it, not because of either one of their situations, but because with each comes a sideshow, comes a media storm that's going to follow this player wherever they go. You saw it this past year with the New York Mets and Tim Tebow. Spring training, they were drawing, fans that they never seen before because people like Tim Tebow. And people weren't even judging on him or football. They just want to see him because he's a celebrity. Colin Kaepernick took a stand. So a lot of people are going to back him up. A lot of people are going to, support him regarding everything that it is that's going on. Everything that he stands for, they're going to back him. So you're a National Football League team and you say, do I want to sign a guy that's going to hold the clipboard that we hope is not going to get in the game, or do I want to take a chance on Colin Kaepernick, who could probably still play a little bit, but I got to deal with the media storm. I got to deal with being asked 100 questions about what I feel about whether he kneels or he stands. Colin Kaepernick's going to have to address the press and say, I'm going to stand for the national anthem, or I'm going to continue to kneel for the national anthem. I understand from a business standpoint why that would be getting in the way. And I get it. But there's still no point that makes it okay that you can tell this man he can't have a job. Especially when we're talking about a job that has a very short shelf life to it. You see National Football League players retire after a year, after 2 years. Very few make it into their 30s. Very few make it into the second half of their 30s. The Tom Brady's of the world, there aren't that many that end up deciding to play that long. And all it takes is one shot to the head. Not only your football career is over, but your life may never be the same. So because Colin Kaepernick takes a knee during the national anthem, he deserves to not have a job? I'll tell you what I think about when I think of Colin Kaepernick. And this is outside of any individual opinion one may have in regards to kneeling for the national anthem or the right to have to stand for it. Take all that aside. And if you're a young enough fan and you haven't researched it, please research this. If you're an older fan, you understand the case of what happened with Curt Flood and free agency in Major League Baseball. This was a man who played several years, won 2 World Series championships for the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1960s. Was traded to the Philadelphia Phillies. Didn't feel comfortable going there because, his opinion wasn't as accepting of black athletes. And he may have been right. Excuse me, but he ends up challenging baseball's reserve clause, which basically says, hey, you play for what team we tell you to play for, and ended up sacrificing 3 years of his career for standing up for an issue that he believed in. And when baseball players are sitting there overpaid, sitting here settling for $22 million instead of $30 million for a season, having the right to have free agency. The first person you thank is Marvin Miller, yes. But what Curt Flood did for baseball does not get appreciated anywhere near as much as it should. The guy sacrificed his career because of a belief in a cause. And you see where I'm getting at here? Colin Kaepernick, whether you agree or disagree with his stance and his opinion, stood up for something he believed in. I don't know if he understood what he was getting into in regards to sacrificing the rest of his football career.